Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and the USA. What do these 4 countries have in common with the US? Any ideas?
Get the death penalty.
Yes, so you're at the title. All of these countries are members of the 21 states that allow the death penalty in the world, which is significant that out of 198 nations, only 21 allow it. All other countries have banned it due to human rights violations. In 1976, the federal government reinstituted capital punishment, allowing states to decide whether or not to issue the death penalty. Today, 33 states allow it, but as time passes, this number grows smaller and smaller. In fact, today, California voters are voting on whether or not to continue issuing the death penalty in their state. At the moment, 7 states have officially banned it. By tomorrow, maybe 18. New York is one of the 17 states that have banned the death penalty. From 1995 to 2004, New York State allowed capital punishment. During this time, 7 men went on death row. However, none of them were actually executed because in 2004, New York Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty is cruel and unusual punishment. The death penalty should be banned because it's morally wrong. To kill someone who no longer poses a threat to society is murder. The state shouldn't give itself the right to kill in order to prove that killing is wrong. I've added the quote, why do people kill people? Why do we kill people who kill people? To show that killing people is wrong. One frightening and irreversible flaw of capital punishment is that the state may execute an innocent person. Unlike other criminal punishments, the death penalty cannot be revoked. Since 1976, over 100 people have been proven innocent and released from death row. But unfortunately, some were found innocent too late. The state-sponsored murder of even one innocent person is one too many. I'd like to discuss a very recent case of Troy Davis. Last year, he was executed by the state of Georgia through lethal injection because he was convicted of the killing of a police officer. His court case took place 20 years ago in 1991. And over time, 7 out of his 9 eyewitnesses recanted their statements. They took back what they had said at trial, and that was what led to his conviction. During his 20 years of appeals, Davis always maintained his innocence. His struggle received international attention, and the Pope, Jimmy Carter, and other prominent officials agreed that he should be released. Despite their calls, Georgia refused to reopen the case, and Davis was killed. The Pope himself can't get a man off of death row, so that demonstrates just how hard it is to overturn a conviction. The only person that could actually remove somebody from death row is the state governor's pardon. Those who support the death penalty argue that the people sentenced deserve the most extreme punishment. However, there is no equal application of the death penalty. The poor and minorities are disproportionately affected due to discrimination. Whether somebody ends up on death row is directly correlated to how much money they spend on a competent attorney. The poor can't afford good lawyers, therefore they end up in jail more often. In addition, the color of one's skin affects sentencing. People of color, particularly African Americans, are much more likely to be executed than whites, especially if the victim of the crime is white. Because our justice system is racist and biased towards the wealthy, the death penalty should never be considered fair and just. The death penalty is also often debated on moral grounds, but many fail to recognize the financial grounds that should be used to impose the death penalty. It imposes a significant burden on the taxpayer. As I already discussed, in the 9 years that capital punishment was allowed in New York, there were 7 men placed on death row. During those 9 years that it was allowed, New York taxpayers spent over $200 million on 7 cases. None of these cases were even close to finishing their appeals, so we can't even begin to estimate how much money this would have cost if they had gone through the entire process. The average cost for a New York inmate is about $32,000 per year. Life without parole would be a much cheaper option because the cost of trials, appeals, and housing for death row is just too expensive. And in states that do allow capital punishment, like Texas and Florida, the average cost to execute a person is $2 million. Imagine all the other uses that money could go towards. The death penalty is the least efficient use of taxpayer dollars. Instead of spending $2 million per case, states could invest in education, gun control problems, drug programs, gun control programs, or even give tax breaks to citizens. Deterrence means how often a person returns to do a crime after they're convicted. It depends on frequency and consistency, but as I've already discussed, capital punishment is inconsistent and infrequently imposed. Therefore, the amount of money wasted on death penalty cases is especially outrageous, considering that it's not an effective deterrent. It's useless. According to the FBI, states with the death penalty do not have lower crimes than states without it. Although the death penalty doesn't stop crime, it's used because it allows the state to avoid addressing the real issues. Instead of solving the causes of crime, they just avoid the issue. In conclusion, capital punishment is too flawed, ineffective, and cruel to be continued. The moral and financial costs of the death penalty unnecessarily burden society. Regardless of the nature of the crime, the characteristics of the offender, the death penalty should be banned in every state. Questions?
Oh, when you went to that case where 9 people were eyewitnesses and then 7.
Yeah, 7 recanted.
Yeah, what happens to them? Because is that lying in the court of law or anything? Or?
Yeah, I didn't actually read about what actually happened to them, but the fact that they came forward and admitted they lied is a sacrifice to their own lives. They could be prosecuted for perjury.
Right.
It all depends on what the district attorney decided to do, but it's very significant that 7 came forward because they're risking their own lives by coming forward.
I think that if you recant, you basically can claim confusion or more evidence presented or something. So I don't think you're necessarily admitting perjury or anything like that. I think you're just basically indicating that as the case then got discussed in the papers, perhaps whatever other information came forward.
I know some of them claim that they were influenced by the police. He was actually, the murder occurred when a homeless man was in a fight with somebody. So the off-duty cop came to interrupt, and somebody shot him. Eyewitnesses testified that they saw Davis do it, but nobody's sure. He has never owned a gun. They couldn't find any evidence that he had a gun. There was no substantial evidence. They just based the entire trial off of the eyewitness testimony.